Time to talk some more hockey. This time, we're joined by Chris Johnston of Northstar Bets. Chris, I'm going to save you the question of, is this the year? Can the Leafs finally get past the first round and beat the Tampa Bay Lightning? We're not going to ask you that question, but I'm going to throw it over to Sharms first because he's pretty fired up today.
Hey, CJ. Yeah, I just want to, talk about hockey people, right, and their narratives. I've covered many sports, and more recently, of course, hockey. I love hockey. I always have. It's fantastic. But the one narrative that just keeps being grinded and ground down into my soul this thing about the playoffs. Oh, it's different hockey. It's different sport entirely. It's all about experience and grit. And I know it's different. I know it's more physical. It's more intense. But isn't it overblown a little bit much?
I mean, that might be the case. The problem is I'm a hockey person, right? So I'm going to see it maybe from the side of that narrative being true. And I think, when that discussion's sad, James, like what people are really saying is that it's harder to score goals during the playoffs. I mean, I think that is objectively true. And so there's more, I guess, pressure on the players not to make mistakes because mistakes tend to be what lead to a goal. And so when you basically bring the margins in and there's so little between teams and there's fewer goals to be had in general, for the most part, I think that's maybe where we talk about it. And then, of course, the physicality that will be evident if you turn on your TV Tuesday night or Wednesday night and start watching the games. I mean, there's just more energy, excitement, and basically a little bit more physical play in the sport.
With that said, CJ, you decided to go with the Leafs in 6 in your predictions article on NorthstarBets.ca. Do you believe the Leafs have what it takes to play that type of hockey to beat Tampa Bay?
I do. I mean, this is a different team. I mean, it's the same storyline because you have Leafs and Lightning, and we saw that last spring. For people that have been around Toronto, they'll talk about the 6 previous times that, a Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Riley core of players, failed to get past the first round. But, look at the changes that have been made even in a year. I mean, the Leafs are going to have 5 players in their lineup for game 1 against Tampa that weren't part of the team just until the trade deadline. And you're adding guys like Ryan O'Reilly, Nola Chari, Luke Shen, Jake McCabe, Sam Lafferty. I mean, players that by and large, they bring experience. I think they bring versatility in terms of what Sheldon Keefe can do in terms of, making changes in game or between games if need be. And, I think this is a deeper team than they were a year ago. I think they've played some pretty good hockey down the stretch. And on the other side of the equation, you have a Lightning squad that's basically, barely been above 500 in the second half of the season. And so, while there's tons of respect for the individuals and all they've accomplished on that team, the fact they've been to 3 Stanley Cup finals, which I don't think will be matched for, I'm going to have to work a long, long time before I see any team get to 3 straight finals. I think just in the age of the salary cap and with it being a 32 team league nowadays, Tampa's accomplished a lot, but they're not the same team that they have been in these past 3 years.
There's so many storylines, obviously, with these two. One that keeps popping up, and it's popped up even the last time these two teams met, is Andrei Vasilevsky, the big key guy for the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Leafs still have that offensive core that can score goals and put up tons of points. But do they have what it takes to finally get through this guy? And what do they need to do exactly to beat Vasilevsky?
Well, I think their power play being more effective this time around would be one obvious area where I think that they could have more of a breakthrough and maybe make life easier on themselves. I mean, it's been actually a bit of a head-scratching part of, all the Leafs sort of playoff failures or their unsuccessful playoff runs is that, the power play is not carried over from the regular season to the postseason for whatever reason. And when you think about it, that one game stayed, I mean, maybe the biggest difference is, of course, you're playing the same team again and again and again. So there's more adjustments, specific adjustments that the penalty killers can make. But there's no logical reason why that shouldn't be the case. And the Leafs once again arrive here at the playoffs with one of the best power plays in the entire league. And so I think that can be a separator, a differentiator. And they've shown that the Vasilevsky's beatable too. I mean, they put a lot of pucks by him in last year's series. The problem is they didn't do enough of it in Game 6 and particularly Game 7 where they lost a 2-1 game. But, I don't think that they'll go in, they'll certainly respect Andrei Vasilevsky. I don't know that he's necessarily in their heads. I think probably a bigger question when it comes to goaltending is how is Ilya Samsonov going to handle this stage in this moment as the Leafs starter, because he doesn't have a long track record in the playoffs prior to this.
CJ, John Tavares is a guy who hasn't had much playoff success himself personally, dating back to his time in Long Island. Looks like he's going to be starting this series on the wing with Ryan O'Reilly. Do you think that shift to the wing will free up his offensive game this series as Ryan O'Reilly takes on more of a defensive effort?
Yeah, I think that it's largely about matchups, and Ryan O'Reilly has earned quickly here Sheldon Keefe's trust. It's not to say that John Tavares didn't have it, but I think the fact that Tavares is being shifted to the wing is notable. I mean, it's not a long list of players that have ever played center on a line with John Tavares. He was mentioning actually today after practice, he played in the 2016 World Cup with Team Canada on the wing with Ryan Getzlaf as a center, and then the lockout year 2012-13, he played in Switzerland and Bern. And he actually played the wing a lot of time in that experience. And he had Byron Ritchie as his center. But it's only a couple players that have ever kind of pushed him to the wing, if you call it that. And I think it can free him up in terms of not having to do as much defensively on the ice. Obviously, can see the game a little differently coming off the wall. And quite frankly, I mean, he's playing with two pretty good players in William Nylander and Ryan O'Reilly. And so I think that is a very important line for the Leafs as they kind of get into this playoff series, and they're going to be looking for contributions up and down the lineup to maybe ease some of the offensive pressure off, the likes of Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews.
Staying with Tavares, apparently Matthew Nye is living with him at the moment, not in a hotel. He's staying with the Tavares family. Obviously, he's a captain, but it kind of opens up a good window into who he is. On the surface, obviously a great player, but he's very bland in front of the cameras, doesn't say very much. Not the biggest personality out there, but someone that's close to the team like yourself. I mean, what kind of leader is he behind the scenes? Because from the outside, great player, obviously does the right things, but not the most compelling personality, shall we say.
Yeah, he's not going to make a headline, right? He's not going to give bulletin board material to the other side in any circumstance that I could imagine. But, what he is he earns the respect of everyone he plays with just his outrageous commitment to the craft. And obviously, no athlete reaches the NHL without, being pretty, committed to their fitness and their routine. But John is extremely routine oriented, has, elaborate stretching and everything he does. And I think he does command a lot of respect. I do know he's also gone out of his way, to organize things like team dinners here. I mentioned 5 different players joining this roster just in February before the deadline. He's, I think, taken on a lot of the responsibilities sort of away from the ice to try to, create the circumstances or the environment where they can be comfortable to feel, part of the team. I think that, him inviting Matthew Nyes to come live with his family in the basement is another example of that, just trying to bring everyone together. And I do even know in past off seasons, he's got a cottage up in Muskoka where he likes to spend his time, that he's had, team functions held up there, and, just trying to, bring everyone as close together and find their way through this. So I think he is an excellent leader. He's still a very good player. And the Leafs, he's an important part of this team. The Leafs are built on the idea that they have 4 offensive players that are better than any 4 they're going to face along the way, and that needs to be the case. You need these guys to be scoring goals or producing offense in a series like this if the Leafs are going to indeed play on to the second round and perhaps beyond.
We're speaking with Chris Johnston of Northstar Bets. Chris, the Edmonton Oilers have a similar situation in net heading into the playoffs. A really good goalie, but an inexperienced goalie, being their number 1 guy heading into the playoff series against the LA Kings. I feel like that's not being talked about as much as the Samsonov situation. Do you agree? And why do you think that is?
Well, maybe because Edmonton finished so strong. I mean, it's hard to ignore, whether it's the 16-2-1 finish that Edmonton had since the playoff, the trade deadline pass rather, or, even you go back to Christmas, they're basically the NHL's best team by any way you want to measure, that type of thing. I think that they've had a sort of a leave no doubts finish to their regular season. I mean, let's face it too. I mean, Toronto, there's more microphones, there's more TV cameras, there's just a little bit more buzz at times around the Leafs. I think that they are, the most covered team in the league. So I guess any conversation might be a little louder coming out of Toronto, but let's see how Stuart Skinner fares. He's had a great, what's considered his rookie campaign this year. I know he's played a couple games in the past, but he's sort of taken the ball and run with it and really saved that organization from what, would have been a disastrous signing of Jack Campbell last summer to be their number 1 goaltender. That hasn't worked out to this stage, but that's been augmented by the fact that they had an internal option here that's been able to carry the mail. So, the playoffs are a different animal though. And I think entering as the number 1 goaltender in a Canadian market, having a lot of scrutiny on your play and discussion around that. I mean, you have to, not everyone can handle that kind of stage. And so we're going to have to see, not just in these 2 situations, there's a number of goaltenders around the league that haven't got the job done that are on good teams entering these playoffs. And we got to see which, if any of them, can break through.
When I was looking at your picks, CJ, for the playoffs, I noticed a couple surprises that kind of
Oh,
shook me. The Winnipeg Jets in 7 games against the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the Winnipeg struggled and had a late season surge to the playoffs. Do you think they're hot and cold? They've turned a corner. Now they can take on a Vegas Golden Knights team, or just explain to me your reasoning as to why the Jets will beat the Vegas Golden Knights.
well, the biggest differentiator for me is Connor Hellebuck. While I don't know which version of, I think I refer to them as the Jekyll and Hyde Jets. I don't know which ones we're going to see because there have been times that team put up a lot of offense and had success late in the year and won some games by putting the puck in the net. But then they also had a long run in March and into April where they didn't produce too much at all and were flirting with maybe missing the playoffs. So a bit of an indifferent ending, I would say, for Winnipeg to the regular season. But I like Hellebuck in this series. Vegas just has so many question marks. And look, they won the Pacific Division. Hats off to them. They did it without having a 30-goal scorer on the roster. They did it while using 5 different goaltenders. And more recently, Laurent Brossoit has emerged kind of as their starter. It would appear entering the playoffs. They did it with Mark Stone missing nearly half the season, following back surgery. So they've, Vegas has had to overcome a lot for the success that they managed. But, I would say that I still think that they're a team that could be beaten. And for Winnipeg, they have players that can put the puck in. Then I just think Hellebuck is a sort of goaltender that can steal a game or two on his own. And so, when you're predicting a 7-game series, you're saying it's down to almost coin flip territory. Well, when I flipped the coin, it came up Winnipeg.
It is wide open this year, especially in the West, but even in the East, Bruins aside, it's wide open. Which series is the most compelling for you, CJ? Which one are you most looking forward to watching?
Well, I'm covering Leafs Lightning on the ground, so I probably behoove to say that one. Just the melodrama around it all, right? I mean, it's the games themselves, but the stories are pretty ripe at this point. I've covered the Leafs, actually been to all these playoff games in this era, so it's been a long story unfolding here for a fan base and even for people like myself who cover the team. I'd say from the ones I'm excited to watch from afar, that the Devils Rangers is pretty tasty for me. I think that's 2 teams with a lot of ambition, 2 teams that had great seasons, 2 teams that made big trades at the trade deadline. The Rangers bringing in Patrick Kane and Tarasenko, the Devils making the big deal for Timo Meier. The fact that they share the same region, I think that would be a pretty interesting series. And really, the Devils are an upstart in this conference. I think that a lot of people liked what was going on in New Jersey entering the season, but I'm not sure too many would have predicted them to have as strong a campaign as they did. And I think that they could be a ripe disruptor here and perhaps even knock off the Rangers in this series. So I'd say that's the one I'm probably most excited for. But look, you can't go wrong with the Stanley Cup Playoffs. I think the first round in particular is compelling, and we always see an upset or two somewhere along the way. It's just a matter of where it ends up happening.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating playoffs. It's go time right now. Chris Johnston of Northstar Bets. CJ, thanks for doing this, and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. We'll talk soon, guys.
Thanks, CJ. That's Chris Johnston of Northstar Bets. I'm looking forward to tonight, boys.